Continued look at the U.S. elections and the outcomes as the votes continue to come in. We know that Nevada is not going to declare those votes at least up until Thursday in the afternoon or so. We are waiting to see what's going to come out of Pennsylvania. The governor speaking a little bit earlier on saying they're going to be thorough and make sure that these elections are free and fair and that there is nothing untoward that's going to come out of there. And of course, we're also looking at Michigan. Wisconsin declared a couple of moments ago. Also that going to Joe Biden. But what has been quite key here, of course, is that all-important black vote. We do see the Republican turnout being quite high, but the Black Lives Matter movement has been reverberating across the United States and the world, especially in the last couple of months. But what impact has it had on the outcome of the voters, and how will it change America post the elections? Joining us now to talk about this is the former Georgia State Senate candidate and managing director of the Black Futurist Group, Devin Barrington-Ward. Devin, good evening and good to have you with us here on Newzroom Afrika, channel 405. Devin, the vote so far, if you look at Florida, the black vote was quite key to tipping Florida on the side of Joe Biden. He didn't quite crack it. What does that tell us?
Well, I think that it always shows that when we look at these election results and we look at the results as it pertains to black voters, that black voters, by and large, always do the job that they're supposed to do. The job that is also often expected of us, which is to support candidates that are not trying to degrade America. And so, you know, I look at the election results and see how black voters voted, and yet again, we are always trying to save America from itself. And what I am oftentimes troubled with is that there is this narrative that black voters must carry the entire progressive movement on their back. Sometimes at the expense of themselves. And so I think it's really important that we recognize that the work to overthrow Donald Trump cannot be done solely by black voters, and that black voters, by and large, 80% of black men voted for Joe Biden, 94% of black women voted for Joe Biden. But what we see is white women actually increased the rate in which they voted for Donald Trump from 52% to about 56% in this election. And we know that there is a large quantity of white men who also supported Donald Trump in this election as well. And so, as some of the earlier speakers alluded to, there is a great divide here in America, and it's because we oftentimes we talk about, Joe Biden has talked about winning the soul of America. But you cannot win the soul of America or restore the soul of America without addressing white supremacy and systemic racism. And it continues to permeate throughout this country, and we see it reflected in the results of this election. Because make no mistake, anyone who voted for Donald Trump knowingly voted for a white supremacist, knowingly voted for someone who is racist, knowingly voted for someone who denies that systemic racism exists, as well as knowingly voted for someone who has mismanaged a pandemic, knowingly voting for someone who denies climate change. And this is at the expense of all of us. And so we cannot continue to rely on black voters to do what we've always done. We need other communities to step up as well and recognize that we are in this together, and that work shouldn't be done solely by black people who have been oppressed in this country from the start.
Devin, in terms of the systemic issues that have disenfranchised black Americans in America, how different would a Joe Biden presidency realistically be for those minority group versus what Trump has been over the last 4 years? And I say that also in the context of knowing that the U.S. has had a black president before, and the status quo was very much maintained, and that's part of why individuals like yourself still have to fight the kind of campaigns that you have been.
Yeah, I think that one thing to keep in mind is that I said this earlier on my social media accounts, that it's really important to recognize that even if black America is able to, 13% of the population, mind you, that black America is able to deliver this election for Joe Biden, we will still be disrespected and we will still be dishonored. And so we have to recognize that the work of unrooting white supremacy does not happen solely at the ballot box. It's not indicative of one U.S. president. It's indicative of most U.S. presidents. And people have to relinquish the false narrative that was shared that America somehow moved into a post-racial society, under the administration of Barack Obama. In fact, what was revealed was a lot of the white animosity and resentment towards black people, which is oftentimes grounded in idiocracy. And so I think that you are right to ask that question. What was in it for black communities is a recognition that we are impacted by this pandemic that is being mismanaged, and we know that the majority of the people who have died in this pandemic have been people of color, black people, and other minority groups. And so we recognize that voting for a Joe Biden would see a level of execution in terms of dealing with the pandemic that is much different from this president's current approach, which is to act like it doesn't exist. We also recognize as an organizer, as a community organizer, I vote from a perspective of who do I want to have to get in the ring with, because I recognize that as a black person, I'm going to have to fight anybody that is in the White House, anybody that's in the U.S. Senate, anybody that's in Congress, because oftentimes these are the institutions that are rooted in anti-blackness. But I also have to make that fight make that decision knowing who am I going to have a more honorable fight with. And so many of us in the organizing space recognize that we would have much more honorable fights and the potential for much more strategic victories under a Joe Biden, Kamala Harris administration versus the one that we have right now. So for me, it was a strategic decision to support this Democratic ticket because I recognize that the potential for more advocacy wins, more policy victories, and more political victories for black people was greater under Joe Biden, Kamala Harris administration than the likelihood of that happening under this current administration with Donald Trump.
Now, speaking of the Georgia state, how do you think that is going to swing? Because it's one of those that we are looking at as far as the outcomes of these elections are concerned.
Yeah, at the time right now, the latest update is that the Secretary of State of Georgia, who's the election administrator at our at our state level, has said that we can expect to see final results by the end of the day. That doesn't mean that those votes will be certified, but those will be the unofficial final vote counts. Right now, there's about 200,000 ballots that are still outstanding. Last night, we were made aware of some serious ballot issues as far as a data glitch that jeopardized being able to count almost 80,000 ballots in Gwinnett County. Gwinnett County is a local government here in the state of Georgia and a community that has been trending more progressive over the years as it has become more racially diverse. Also in Fulton County, a county which is the largest county, the largest local government here in the state of Georgia, they had a pipe burst at their election counting facility, and that delayed the count as well. And that county is notorious, that local government is notorious for delayed election results. Matter of fact, after my election in the Democratic primary, I went to the local government board there and demanded that the election administrator resign because we have had these issues with our county elections for years. And so we are trying to work through a lot of those issues. Organizations like Stacey Abrams' Fair Fight is doing a lot to advocate on behalf of black voters. And we are doing our best to stave off the history of voter suppression during this historic election.
Devin, whichever way one looks at it, whatever the outcome of this election, an incredible amount of work is going to be to be done in American society to, I suppose, in many ways, change the false narratives that exist around race, that exist around immigration, that unfortunately have been perpetuated over the last 4 years. So I'm keen to know, for somebody like yourself, where and how would you continue that process, especially if Donald Trump was to remain in office?
Well, I think the work of, I've always said that at the end of the day, I'm still going to be a black person in America, regardless of whether who wins the presidency. And so my work as someone who's committed to liberation and freedom in my lifetime for black people continues regardless of who is occupying 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. And so that work continues to happen with the Movement for Black Lives, organizing in local communities, engaging in deep political education, not shaming our people for not knowing, but bringing folks in and recognizing that we all have something to learn from one another, that we need to be building institutions of power that do not rely on any government, that we need to be building our communities not with the expectation of someone saving us. And many of us have done that work and will continue to do that work. And then for folks who I guess would claim to call themselves to be white allies, I think it's really important that they double down in their community. I think there is a significant portion of white people in this country who recognize either through some deep character flaws of folks in their families and in their communities, or through being able to analyze policy and politics, that we have a white supremacy and systemic racism issue that continues to persist in this country. And so for those who recognize it, I think it's really important to not just recognize it, but do something about it. I don't believe that there are enough white people who recognize the systemic racism issues, who recognize that the issues that we allow to persist in black communities are wrong, do enough about it. Voting for Joe Biden was not enough. If you are not willing to invest in black communities, if you are not willing to follow the leadership of black people, if you are not willing to be what King described as the white moderate that continues to be the degradation of black people and people of color in this country. And undoubtedly, one must also recognize, if they're to call themselves a white ally, one must also recognize that their salvation, their freedom, their liberation and safety is tied up in this as well, and that white supremacy endangers all of us. And so we have to do the work to continue to press forward that message in black communities who have been dealing with it for hundreds of years since we've arrived to the shores of this country and the Caribbean. But also the work needs to be done in white spaces and with white allies who know better but are not doing the work to dismantle these institutions and to dismantle these ideologies. Because the work of dismantling white supremacy must begin with white people.
All right, Devin, I appreciate your time and thanks for coming through tonight. That is the former Georgia State Senate candidate and Managing Director of the Black Futurist Group, Devin Barrington-Ward.